Hello, Think Liberty listeners. Welcome to episode 13 of Tales from the Shire. I'm your host, AJ Olding. So, in my last interview, I interviewed Lynn Ulbricht, and we talked about Ross Ulbricht. I think this is a case that a lot of my listeners are very familiar with. A case of very extreme miscarriages of justice and, attorneys and judges pulling strings the way that they want to, and very bleak outlook for, individuals who are in prison for, doing things that they believed were correct. And so I did that interview with Lynn at, if you remember correctly, at Liberty Forum in New Hampshire, back on February 1st. So the very next day, following interviewing Lynn, I'm back at Liberty Forum, and I'm sitting down to listen to Preston Byrne give a talk about freedom of speech. I'm super excited to listen to this speech. When you've been to like as many like political convention type things as I have, you start to not go to like all of the different talks. You circle like 3 or 4 that you're like, all right, I really want to go to these ones. And then the rest of the time you spend networking. And that's kind of what I was doing. And so I was super excited to see Preston give this talk on freedom of speech. I was sitting in the front row and all this, super, super, super excited. And I looked down at my phone, and Lynn Ulbricht has sent me a text, and it says, do you want another interview? I have someone if you do. So at that point in time, after texting back and forth with Lynn a little bit longer to figure out, who she had for me, I get up, 5 minutes into Preston giving his talk in the very front of the row and like have to scooch past people. I felt really terrible because everyone sees me leave, but I'm like, no, I have to go do this other interview. This sounds like a very interesting case. And so I step outside and I met a woman named Dana Gottesfeld, and she begins explaining this case to me about her husband, Martin Gottesfeld, and it's something that I had genuinely never heard of. It's a case I really, really never heard of before, and that comes off in the interview. If you're listening, it's not quite as prepared and polished as a lot of my other ones, because it was literally a case of, all right, nice to meet you. Okay, explain to me what your issue is. 5 minutes later, all right, let me go set up my computer and we'll record. And so Dana is the wife of a man named Martin Gottesfeld, and Martin is in trouble with the law. He's currently in prison for some cyber activities where he was messing with Boston Children's Hospital back in the mid 2010s, about half a decade ago. If you guys remember the Justina Pelletier case, I don't know how many people remember that. That was all the way back in 2013, and there was this 14-year-old girl from New England. She has these very serious medical conditions that were diagnosed by members of Tufts, of the hospital there at Tufts, and they had to take her to and her parents had to take her to Boston Children's for another issue. And the doctors at Boston Children's say, hey, you've got this other issue. We're not going to double check with Tufts to see that it was actually correct. We're going to take custody from you, take custody away from your parents. And we go through the details of the case a little bit, in this interview. I assume most of you who are listeners of my show probably vaguely remember that case. Martin got in trouble for going after Boston Children's, one of Boston Children's websites, while this was going on, in an effort to get them to let Justina go. And it's interesting, at one point in time in this interview, Dana is going to explain to me, it took Justina getting a video out to the governor of Massachusetts to just be released from Boston Children's when these issues were going on. And so, keep that in mind when we're remembering the last interview that I did with Lynn Ulbricht. Keep that in mind with Ross Ulbricht. If you ever have an opportunity to spread the word out to anyone who can get to Trump or any of those other things, that pardons matter and that executive branches matter when it comes to getting things done that maybe the courts have gotten wrong. Because if you can just convince one person that they need to step in, it's a great way possibly to make a lot of systematic change, or not so much systematic change, but like change in whatever the specific issue it is that you're looking at any given time. And, we go into the details of Martin's case, and then Dana begins to talk to me a little bit about the conditions of Martin's imprisonment. And it's almost like this judicial hot potato where he keeps getting passed around from district to district so that he can't like put together lawsuits in time, things like that. And there's a lot of very sketchy items going on. And I really hope that you guys enjoy this interview. I really hope that you take a lot away from it, because it's a very sobering look at a lot of the things that the legal system does in order to punish those people that it really doesn't like. And so without further ado, here's episode 13 of Tales from the Shire. All right, Dana, thank you for sitting down with me. It's my understanding that your husband is in prison for some controversy around the Justina Pelletier case, and we can go into to his case in a second, but can you kind of walk me back through what the Justina Pelletier case was? Because I remember it being an instance of Boston Children's took a child into their own care and really didn't allow parents or other doctors to offer opinions, and they essentially kept her captive there. Was that your remembrance of that?
Yeah, no, that's pretty spot on. I would say this is like a parent's worst fear in terms of a socialist healthcare nightmare. Justina's parents are from Connecticut, and they brought their daughter to Boston Children's Hospital to see a doctor, and they ended up disagreeing. The doctors at Boston Children's disagreed with Justina's treatment plan and locked her in a psych ward and got her adopted and went to use Child Protective Services to get custody taken away from her parents. It's often called a medical kidnap because it just happens so often. And
do you remember exactly what her issue was that she was diagnosed with by her own practitioners and then Boston Children's?
Yeah, she has mitochondrial disease, so her cells can't make enough energy. And the Boston Children's Hospital folks accused her of somatoform disorder, meaning that the symptoms were part of her imagination, not necessarily from any disease.
Okay, and then I think a lot of us remember that case kind of vaguely. I'm still trying to remember it myself, but she got significantly worse than she was in Boston Children's, so it obviously was not in her head. Is that correct with my remembrance of that case?
That's right. Mitochondrial disease is a degenerative disease. The best you can hope for is to slow down its progress. The worst case scenario is being kept away from therapy and medicine and just getting worse and dying earlier. They accused her parents of Munchausen by proxy, meaning that when her parents are around, she would be worse. And after, keeping her separated, she actually did much worse. And when her parents were around, she was doing better. So it didn't turn out to be anything.
Okay. So Justina's in the hospital, and then your husband comes in and he takes some sort of action against the website of Boston Children's. How exactly did this occur?
Yeah. So Boston Children's Hospital was hosting a fundraiser, and it's a behemoth. It's a Harvard-affiliated institution. And one of the few things that gets their attention is money, is losing money. So Marty did a distributed denial of service during this fundraiser. And what that means is sending too much internet traffic to one website, like making it inoperable. So if it wasn't online, if it was in person, it would be like 100 people waiting in line at McDonald's means that, legitimate customers wouldn't be able to get in.
Right.
So the DDoS lasted for about a week.
Okay. So what was his motivation behind the DDoS? What was he trying to achieve?
Justina's parents were very vocal, coming forth through the media saying, we're afraid our daughter is going to die, begging for help. This was defense of a child's life.
Okay. So
using the tools available to him.
Right. So did he think that this was going to raise awareness for her case, or that this would be enough of a thorn in the side of the people at Boston Children's that they would revisit this and let her out, or what was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, it was to let her out. There's very little that gets through to such a big organization, but Justina was at a different facility still under BCH's care called Wayside. After that, she was transferred to another facility where she was able to make a video appealing to the governor and her judge to let her go. And, this series of events actually led her to being released. After more than over a year being in these terrible conditions, she was finally able to go home.
So in that time period, when was it roughly that your husband did the DDoS on the Boston Children's website?
After she'd already been in the psych ward for more than 13 months.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
So
then she was at Wayside.
Okay, and then she stayed in Wayside for how much longer after that before they let her out?
I think a number of months.
Okay.
But I also just wanted to clarify that no patients were harmed or even potentially harmed by this public-facing website going down. This was everyone was totally safe, and the jury agreed with that at trial.
So we get into the let's get into the legal issues then.
Yeah.
So your husband, when did the legal issues start for your husband? He does this DDoS, and then I assume he's contacted by either Boston's legal team or serves some summons for something. How does that begin?
They came to our house at 6 a.m. one morning. We had actually gone to the FBI's headquarters in Boston to ask them to look into child abuse. So we thought that they were finally responding to us and ready to talk about some of the child abuse going on. But instead, they gave a search warrant, and that's how it began. That was in 2015.
So the FBI came to your house, or who was they?
The FBI came to our house, yeah.
And they, instead of looking into what you were asking about, they instead had received some information from Boston Children's Hospital and are going after you because of that.
Yeah, I mean, what's pretty interesting is that when it comes to actual children being harmed and child abuse, the FBI and the DOJ are more than willing to turn a blind eye. But if a very money-heavy institution like Harvard in Boston asks them to do something, if they ask them to jump, the FBI will say how high. It's a huge mismatch of priorities for what's actually protecting kids and what their priorities are.
Okay. So analyzing potential conflicts of interest within that aside, proceeding on with the case. So what was he actually charged with by the FBI?
So I think the charges came from the Department of Justice, from the prosecutor's office. It was attempt to access a protected computer and conspiracy. Okay.
So attempt to access a protected computer. What is... So in your mind, how did they argue that it was either one of those things, I guess?
Well, I should also just mention that these two are charges under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act with the same judge and originally under the same U.S. attorney that did Aaron Swartz's case.
I am unfamiliar with Aaron Swartz.
Okay. Aaron Swartz was one of the co-founders of Reddit, an internet prodigy who was trying to make documents that were publicly available just free to the public. And he ended up committing suicide before his case. But back to your question, at trial, Marty was very forthcoming and open about what was at stake for this girl and how he was willing to help. When you do the right thing, when you try to defend the life of another, you don't have to hide and be secretive in the way that, you know what I mean? You're proud to help defend a child's life. So,
yeah. Okay. So he got in trouble for this. Obviously, was the jury, what was the ultimate outcome of it? Was he charged with several other things, and then this is what he actually got convicted for, or how did that go in the trial itself, the conviction and then sentencing from the judge?
So the attempt to access a protected computer, you have to meet one of two criteria. One is you charged the hospital at least $5,000 in damage. I forget what the other one was.
Okay.
You potentially endangered somebody.
Okay.
And so the damage was more than $5,000, meaning they lost more than $5,000 to pay an IT company to bring the website back.
Right.
And so that's a federal crime.
Okay.
And then conspiracy was talking about it on Twitter. In retrospect, it looks like I have reason to believe that that person on Twitter either worked with the FBI at the time or worked with them afterwards.
So what was occurring on Twitter exactly?
Somebody pointed out Wayside as a place that should be also DDoSed.
Okay. So this is someone who's communicating with your husband on Twitter, or someone said something on Twitter and then it got ascribed to your husband?
No, somebody messaged him, or he was messaging with someone on Twitter, and this person recommended Wayside. So I believe that it may be somebody that either works for the FBI or with the FBI.
Okay, so...
But that they didn't bring this person up at trial. So
did his DDoS go at a Wayside fundraiser, or just Boston Children's fundraiser?
Both. It was to both.
Both.
Places.
Okay.
Justina was at Wayside at the time, but under BCH's care.
Okay. All right. So then, what are your next steps right now to try to get your husband Marty out of prison?
Yep. So Marty is at a really terrible prison called the Communications Management Unit in Terre Haute, Indiana. They have him in...
I've been to Terre Haute. It is a terrible place.
Yeah, and you haven't even been in the prison, huh?
Mm-hmm.
But it's... Not only is the prison terrible, but he's in solitary. And this is unlike other solitaries in that they don't even comply with Federal Bureau of Prison rules.
How can they get away with that?
How can they get away with so much is really the question. Okay. He's been there since December 9th in this shoe, and it is on top of a steam pipe, so it's incredibly hot. There's no desk to do any of his writing. Mm-hmm. The water is contaminated in this shoe. It corrodes the sink basin, and it's very dirty. So he's actually on a hunger strike.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
the medical at first was giving him IVs, but now they bring him bottled water occasionally. So it's a really crazy situation. I mean, they also keep him in extreme isolation. So usually you get a radio and access to newspapers while you're in solitary, and they won't give that to him either. They're really trying to break him down. Yeah. So what is the motivation behind where they have put him in the prison system? As far as I interviewed with Lynn Ulbricht the other day, and her son started out in a very maximum security prison with a lot of other dangerous people. And after some amount of time, he got moved into safer and easier places. What is their motivation right now for keeping your husband in the terrible place where he's in? Yeah, I think I heard from Lynn that Rand Paul made a call to get Ross moved into a better facility. Okay. So that's probably something with his case. The CMU is very retaliatory towards people who have access to media. Marty's a conservative journalist. His writing appears since he's been in jail. We have a lot of it listed on our site, Free Marty G, but it's been in Western Journal, Red State, The Intercept. And so I think they use this to keep him quiet. And also he's suing the Bureau of Prisons over his time at MCC New York when they kept him in solitary for 81 days without any access to an administrative detention hearing, which is your way to appeal it. Mm-hmm. So what they do is they just avoid giving you any alternatives to appeal your classification.
Okay, so that's all really terrible stuff. So he's in the middle of this lawsuit over those past wrongs while he's been in prison. Do you guys have legal avenues right now to try to get him out, or?
So he has this lawsuit against the Bureau of Prisons in MCC, New York, is happening right now in the Southern District of New York. And it's just been, he's requested an emergency hearing on December 9th, and it's still, the judge still hasn't ruled. Okay. We really feel like we're in limbo.
So if he wins that case, that's just over wrongdoing while he's been in prison.
Yeah.
So he's still there, correct?
To some extent, that's true, but he's also written about a lot of the ways that the CMU is treating him here. And he's making the case that, what he was in New York, and he was moved out of New York so that the judge would no longer have jurisdiction over the case. And what he's saying is, like, the Bureau of Prisons can just keep moving people out of jurisdiction to sabotage lawsuits against them. Because they have access over these people's locations.
So right now you're in a situation where he's trying to sue one prison district, and they move him to a different prison district before he can sue them. And now he's having all these problems at the Terre Haute facility. And let's say one day he puts together a lawsuit for that. You expect that they would just move him to another equally awful place?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really underhanded.
So then what's the path forward then to get around that? If you don't end up getting this lawsuit to go through in New York,
or if the judge rules against it, yeah.
Or if the judge rules against it, what is the next avenue for you to pursue? Are you pursuing, a hopeful pardon, maybe like what Lynn Ulbricht is looking for, or what are the paths that you're taking right now?
Yeah. So he also has a habeas corpus, meaning he wants his body to be produced, or him to be able to see a judge in the Southern District of Indiana. So that's one avenue. He has an appeal of his criminal case in Massachusetts. And yeah, absolutely. We think this is a huge case of injustice by Obama DOJ holdovers. And we would love for Trump to do a commutation or pardon. That would be fantastic.
So he's got an appeal going on in Massachusetts. How is that progressing right now?
Well, we just got a new attorney a few weeks ago instead of his court-appointed attorney. So it's really just starting back up again.
Really just starting up. Okay.
Yeah.
So if the appeal in Massachusetts goes through, that's probably his best route out. And then how can people help you out?
Well, we have a website, freemartygg.com, and that's where we keep people up to date on what's going on with him in the prison. When we have fundraisers, when we have movements, that's pretty much our hub, our centralized hub. And we're also Free Marty G on Facebook and Twitter, where we post most of our stuff.
All right. Well, I hope that goes well for you. Do you know, shifting back to the whole thing that caused all of this, do you know if Boston Children's has reformed any of the way that they operate, or are they still keeping kids locked up when they disagree with the way other doctors have already been treating kids?
I can say I haven't heard of any new cases since Justina, but I wouldn't say that means that they're not happening. I do know for a fact that they moved the head of the Child Protective Unit, Alice Newton, over to Mass General Hospital. And I have been contacted by families at Mass General saying that Alice is doing the same thing to them. It's kind of similar to the Catholic Church, where they don't fire people; they just keep moving them around.
Oh my God. So,
and it's terrifying.
This Alice Newton woman, you're saying that people are contacting you, telling you
their
that
daughters.
She's using ways to keep like adult human beings held up in in Mass General?
Yeah, the woman I spoke to, her daughter is over 18. She's disabled, but they're trying to do the same thing, this medical kidnap. They're trying to get her custody taken away from the mom or a legal guardianship and move her into like a group home. They're not letting her leave. They're not letting... And when I say take custody away, I mean calls are monitored, visits are monitored, legal guardianship is taken away. It's vicious, it's scary, and it's hard to understand the motivations. Like, these people are actually do not seem to want to help families stay together and get better, but there's something else going on. It may have to do with federal reimbursement for kids that are wards of the state getting adopted into other families. They get, I believe, $5,000 for each child and $6,000 if the kid is disabled once they get adopted through federal reimbursement. It's called the America's Safe Families Act under Clinton.
All right. God, that's all awful. Like,
yeah, it's crazy, right? Like, everything about this story just kind of gets worse and worse. Like, and I'm sure, have you ever heard of something like this happening? Are you familiar with like hospitals using this kind of maneuver?
I mean, I was familiar with the Justina Pelletier case when it was going on. And
it's still going on. They're actually suing right now in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
A lawsuit.
Well, I hope that goes well for them. And I know Boston Children's did that to another kid prior to Justina, but I do not remember the details of that case.
Yeah, no, I've just through research, I found 4 or 5 other cases, and some of the kids die, with these terrible diseases.
Wow, so that's all. It's so depressing.
It is depressing, isn't it?
Okay, so we've got your website to go to, freemartyg.com. Are there any other resources that you would want to push people towards for the rest of all of that garbage that you also brought up around the medical issues?
Yeah, no, it's on our website under the in the news tab.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for speaking to me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Is there anything else you want to leave any listeners with?
Just keep defending your rights, because I think I heard Chappelle say recently, the First Amendment is there for a reason, and the Second Amendment is there just in case you need it.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, take care. Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening to episode 13 of Tales from the Shire. It was kind of interesting making this one, again, because the interview process was so much different than what it normally has been with my other episodes, where it was everything else I've put together has been something that I've known a lot about and have been able to prepare stuff. And so, maybe give me some feedback. Find me on Twitter at Andrew Olding. Find me at my at my Facebook page. If you just search, Tales from the Shire podcast, you'll find me on Facebook. Provide me a little bit of feedback on this one. Because this was, a very, very different interview format than normal. This is, I really did go in blind. And so if you don't know anything about Martin Gottesfeld case, or if you didn't before going into this interview, this was like the perfect one to listen to. So a little bit of follow up with one of the issues that we did talk about in the interview. The Justina Pelletier case has actually ended. Their lawsuit of Boston Children's has come to an end. The jury found no wrongdoing on the part of Boston Children's, which is something that is unbelievably shocking to myself. I assume it's unbelievably shocking to many people. So, yeah, just thought I should throw this in there. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. Please share it with all your friends on Facebook and Twitter and wherever else. If you want to interact with us, the Think Liberty Network can be found on all of the major social media networks. And if you really, really enjoyed the podcast and you really, really feel like rewarding us, you can find us on patreon.com. If you just search Think Liberty Network again, it'll come up. Thank you guys so much. Come back next week for another episode.